Hi, glad you could join me. Last week I didn't come to you, I just shared something we did some time back in 2020, which was looking at the 4-4-2 formation, the pros and cons in both attack and defense. But this week I'm back with something different. A subject that has been on my mind lately for a lot of reasons, going by the experiences I've had coaching in our football in the lower leagues, going up to the second tier of Zambian football, which is the Eden University National League. My observations, even beyond that, from what I've seen with other teams, national teams, club football, and just other ordinary teams, really, even as far as other sport disciplines are concerned, there has been a concern on my mind, and I think it is a psychological thing, a mental thing, and that is why I thought that today we could look at the need and impact of sports psychologists in teams, or why teams must make it a point that they employ sports psychologists. In general terms, I think to start with, in general terms, what is sports psychology? Sports psychology basically is a study that looks at psychological factors that could affect an athlete's performance, and by athlete performance, an athlete we mean it could be a footballer, it could be a runner, it could be a basketballer, it could be anyone, basically, because when you look at most of these sport disciplines, the things that affect performance, most of them are common, and among that common factor is the issue of the mind. Among that common factor is the psychological issue. So basically, it looks at the factors that affect performance for an athlete. Now, why is there a need to have sports psychologists, or why the need for psychologists in a team? Basically, to help players or to help athletes cope with the pressure that comes with competing, as well as to improve their performances. The fact is that pressure cannot be avoided for an athlete. Pressure cannot be avoided for a footballer, for anyone really. And so there has to be someone that must help you, train you to help you manage this pressure better, so that your performance can be good. Because remember, when there's too much pressure, performance is inhibited. So you need someone to create a balance. And at the same time, sports psychology aims at improving one's performance generally. Now, what is the main idea? The main idea behind sports psychology is that it tries to strike a balance between the physical activity and mental well-being of an athlete. But the bottom line is that there has to be priority of mental fitness for one to perform at the highest of levels. So against this background, what is the impact really, or why the need to have sports psychologists? What is the impact that is going to come with having sports psychologists in teams? I think the first one we should look at is that sports psychologists will help athletes develop a certain level of mental toughness that will enable them to get into optimal performances. Now, what are we talking about when we look at mental toughness? The first thing that an athlete must have if they are going to win anything at the end of the day is that there must be a certain level of belief in the ability that they have as an individual, and equally as a collective. What are we talking about? When one doubts their own ability, trust me, they can only compete maybe at the most basic of levels. And that is why sometimes you find that you have a lot of expectations about this team, a lot of expectations about this player, but because this side of the game, of the performance related factor has not been dealt with, they don't really believe that they have the ability to do whatever it takes, and at the end of the day it affects their performance, and they cannot give you the result that you are looking for. The other need for mental toughness comes in when you want to recover from defeats. Look, defeat is painful. I've suffered quite a lot of those along the way. As much as we've won, we've suffered quite a lot along the way. And so just the way it feels when you lose, really it's very difficult for you to move on. So you need someone that is going to come in and as early as possible make sure that the players understand that this that they have lost, it has happened, they have lost, but they have a much more important task coming ahead. You know, the players that I've coached will tell you that I always told them to say the most important game is the next game that you are playing. So once this game is done, you should be focusing on the next game, and that is the most important game that you are going to be playing. And so there are times that you find that maybe 72 hours after a particular game, or 4 days after a particular game, players are still thinking of the defeat that they suffered. So it's important that you have this professional that comes in, try and sort this thing out as early as possible. Players must forget about the past performance and move forward to look at the next game, because that's the most important. The next game is the most important. The next competition is the most important for any athlete at any level. And it's also just important to have this person who's going to help the player refocus, the athlete refocus. Imagine someone who's coming back from an injury. Sometimes they're coming back from an injury, then 2 months of rehab, then there's a relapse, they go back to where they were initially. You need someone that is going to come in really and tell this person, say, look, this is possible, we are going to do it, it's just a minor setback, but we must move forward because there is much greater that is coming ahead. That is one of the first things that a sports psychologist is going to do, ensure that there's mental toughness among the athletes. Moving forward, I think a very important thing as well that a sports psychologist will do is that they will help you to deal with the anxiety and equally to manage the pressure. Now, there's a lot of anxiety, especially pre-match or pre-competition. There's a lot of anxiety. You have certain doubts. The adrenaline is running. There are a lot of things that are going on, and so because of anxiety, sometimes performances are not very good. You have seen certain teams that maybe in the first 10, 15 to 20 minutes they seem to have a paralysis because maybe this stage seems to be so big for them, and by the time they grow into a match, by the time they realize that it's doable, it's already maybe too late. So to prevent too late a hero, so to say, you must ensure that there is an individual that is coming in to manage the anxiety levels. Sometimes just stage fright. I mean, it's understandable. He is an individual. Maybe the biggest crowd they've ever performed in front of is 1,000 people. Then you take them to a stadium that has 50,000 people. Imagine what that does. They'll feel out of place. They'll feel probably inadequate. And because of that, they are going to develop a certain level of anxiety. Not because they cannot really perform, but just anxiety because of the factors that are just coming in. And so you need someone to manage that if you're going to be able to get the results that are required. The fact is that anxiety and pressure, they inhibit performance. I think I alluded to this earlier on in my introduction. They inhibit performance, and as long as they are not dealt with, they're not going to have the top performing athletes, regardless of the competition. I mean, there are certain times that you've seen even some of our clubs, they'll do well locally, then take them on an international stage. A team that ordinarily you think they shouldn't even struggle with, they struggle with, and in the worst case scenarios, they're even booted out. Sometimes you want to blame players, sometimes you want to blame coaches that maybe they are not good enough and all those other things. But trust me, to get a team to win, to get an entity to thrive, there are a lot of these factors which must come together, and as long as that part is not done, then getting results correctly is correct results or desired results is really going to be far-fetched. It might be an issue of luck more than intention and process. But if we're going to get it right, we must be very intentional. We must be people that respect processes, and part of respecting some of these processes calls for engagement of sports psychologists. The other reason why sports psychologists are of need is that they remove all distractions. Now, in the modern game or modern day competition across any sports discipline, there are a lot of distractions. Sometimes distractions can be in the form of fans, because fans are ever demanding. Now, earlier when I spoke about process, here is a team that is still in the process. Let me use an example that is maybe say from football. Ideally, your pre-season should be around maybe 6 weeks, for example, at least minimum 6 weeks going forward. And so if you're going to play a practice match, for example, in week number, week number 4, which ideally shouldn't happen, but okay, say you are playing a practice match in week number 4. You are trying to look at a particular specific component in the game. But then the fans out there, all they want you to do is they just want you to win. They don't really care how you do it. But then for you, in trying to practice a certain component, or in trying to work on a particular thing, that is maybe what matters to you most in that particular moment. And so you might lose a game, and then there's this pressure that will come from fans, because they're always demanding. Sometimes it could be in a fully fledged competition. The fans just want a lot more. They just demand for a lot more. And if you're not able to give them a lot more, they are really going to criticize you. But the fact is that you need someone, or players must give it to a level where they actually develop a certain level of tolerance. Now, this certain level of tolerance is not just going to come, it's not a given. It has to be done through a particular process to develop this certain level of tolerance and actually realize the fact that the fan actually has the right to do what they are doing, because you as an athlete or you as a performer are paid to do the correct thing, or are paid to perform at the highest level, or you are paid to give them the results. And as long as one does not put that in their minds, and they are going to struggle once the fans begin to say a lot. Sometimes in games there are a lot of critics. I'm probably one of those critics, because I'll talk about performances of players, I'll talk about performances of certain teams. You know, there are a lot of writers out there, a lot of bloggers out there who say a lot of things, and just, you know, so one needs to understand that, look, there are equally people that are actually paid to criticize, and so they'll criticize you at any particular time. But if you're going to take that criticism and even use it as a fuel to do much more, then there is need to develop certain mental faculties or bring out certain mental faculties, and that can only happen when there are sports psychologists in place. That is for sports people. So without that, it's always going to be far-fetched. Without that, it's always going to be a struggle to get that part of the game right. Sometimes it's just distractions from family, you know. Sometimes that's distractions from certain pressures around, and so you need one that is going to come in and, you know, make the player focus on the task at hand, make the player, for those moments that are very critical, forget about anything else that is out there, and know that in that particular moment what matters the most is the game at hand. What matters most is the competition that they've entered. And once we start doing some of those things right, then we'll be setting ourselves up on an upward trajectory, to get the results that are required, and in turn get sustained success, not short-lived success, but sustained success. Number 4, in terms of why you need the sports psychologist, really, it's an element of motivation. Now, I know that people will argue that a coach must be a motivator. Yes, the coach must be a motivator, but the coach can only do so much. Remember, motivation is just among the many things that a coach has to do. There's a long list of the roles of a coach, a long list of the functions of a coach. And so for some of these things, they're just going to touch a bit. Now, if teams are able to employ physiotherapists, if teams are able to employ team doctors, if teams are able to employ nutritionists, because all these things are related to physical conditioning, which is related to performance, they are related to the nutrition, which is related to performance. Why then should teams not engage a sports psychologist, a psychologist whose job is related to performance? And so the fact that they're able to engage these other professionals means that they should actually also be able to engage a professional in terms of the mental side of the game to get the motivation right. Now, motivation has got two legs basically. There's the intrinsic side and the extrinsic side. Intrinsic is more internal, extrinsic is external. Now, I believe, and firmly so, that you cannot get the most if you are just extrinsically motivated than you are intrinsically. I believe it should start from within, intrinsic, before it becomes external. Part of this intrinsic motivation should be, you know, the desire to get things right, to do things well. There should be a particular will that this is doable, and also equally, dreams actually are a source of intrinsic motivation. But then you need an individual to actually ignite this in a particular athlete, in a particular player. You need an individual to ignite this, or maybe reignite it in case it had gone down. And that is what a sports psychologist does. On the other side, you are going into a competition now. This person is motivated intrinsically. They need the external motivation now. But then they must understand that this external motivation, it's things like money, your trophies, and recognition. But then before they put particular focus on this, there has to be this that must come from here. Then you marry it, the intrinsic, and you marry the extrinsic, and you put them together, and then you're going to have top performance. This can only be done, unfortunately, on a full-time basis by a sports psychologist. So you need an individual that is going to bring this bright side. You need an individual that is going to bring this awesome side, to bring it together, put it in an athlete, and have them perform for you in the way that you desire that they do. So motivation is another factor why you need to have these particular individuals. Coaches can only do so much, but that in the long term, you need someone specifically to do that job for you. Number 5, there's an element of winning mentality. Now, a winning mentality is not a once-off thing. It has to be developed over a particular course of time. I think some time back I wrote something about the winning mentality, and those might have read it. I think this will sound like a revision. Now, a winning mentality borders on two things primarily. There's the element of self-confidence, and then there's the element of continuous improvement. Now, self-confidence in itself basically is someone saying this is doable. Now, when we say self-confidence, we are not telling people that because we say everything is doable, then it's going to be all rosy or it's going to be a walk in the park. Unfortunately, it isn't. There are a lot of a lot of valleys along the way, a lot of hills along the way, and whatnot. But then the level of self-confidence we're talking about is what tells someone that regardless of what is along the way, I'm going to make it. Now, trust me, getting an individual to get to a level where they actually believe that regardless of the obstacles that are on the way, is that something is still doable regardless. It's a hard job. It's a hard job. It requires a professional. And as long as our players do not have that in their minds, then they are going to struggle. Look, we've known, for example, for a long time that when you're going to play a continental fixture in North Africa, they're going to use certain intimidating gimmicks against you. When you're going to West Africa, you will find these things. And so it's unfortunate that even up to date, you find the club coming back from West Africa and then they say there was no power, maybe at the hotel where we were accommodated, or there was no water, or we couldn't get access to a good training facility. I mean, look, those are very simple things which, if you had sports psychologists, for example, these are things that are going to be easily addressed. And so players are going to be going into some of these battles fully knowing and actually expecting the worst to happen. And trust me, if they are prepared for the worst, nothing is going to distract them. Nothing is going to take their performance down. And that's the level of self-confidence that we're talking about. Knowing that it's doable regardless of the hurdles that I'm going to face along the way. Now, the other element after self-confidence is the element of continuous improvement. Players, athletes must recognize and must realize the fact that there's always room for improvement. There is always room for improvement, and they should always seek for continuous improvement. There's basically no limit as to what one can do. Now, this sounds very easy to say, and in doing it, it's not a very easy thing. That is why I keep saying that sports psychologists and their work should not be a once-off thing. They must be engaged on a permanent basis, and step by step, they are building blocks to these things. They are building blocks to these things. Because remember, here's someone that has just won a league title today, and it's not very easy for most of them to actually tell them, say, look, there's a lot much more that you can win out there. Maybe you can go for the Champions League now. You can go after that you can go for the Club World Cup. After that you can go for ABCD. Now, getting that across to a player and making them believe this and using it as a fuel or something that they believe to spur their performances is not a very easy thing. Coaches have got a lot of things I think that they have to do. Humanists have a lot of things that they have to do. The physios, the doctors, and all these things. Sports psychologists must be engaged if we are going to get this part of the game right. And maybe finally for today, I think sports psychologists also play a part in helping players prevent destructive habits. Remember what I said earlier on? I said that taking a defeat is not a very easy thing. Sometimes you find players wasting themselves away, maybe drinking themselves away, smoking themselves away, over partying because they just want to forget about this defeat, or they just want to forget about a lot of things that are happening out there. So they will engage in these destructive behaviors because for those moments they feel that that is a point of rest or a point of strength, when in fact not. And so sports psychologists will help prevent destructive habits for athletes. Now, in summary, after all these things that I've said, you may have missed all these things that I said earlier on, but please take home this factor. Athletes are tired both physically and mentally. But remember, there is a very long season in which they have to compete regardless of their tiredness, mentally and physically. And so, to be able to get the fuel to go again, to be able to get the drive to go again, to be able to get the idea and recognize that pain is maybe just but temporal, but there's a bigger job to do ahead, they need sports psychologists. It's that simple, because there has to be a balance between the mental and the physical side. And the physical side can be okay, but if the mental side is not okay, then you are in trouble. Both the physical and mental side can be tired. But if you convince yourself mentally that everything is doable, then the physical is going to fall into this, and then you're going to thrive. That is the chief reason why we need these people. Now, professionals must be employed on a full-time basis, and I believe so. Resources must be set aside for this, because look, clubs want results, but the fact is that you're not going to get results if you do not do all things accordingly. National teams want results, but you're not going to get results if things are not done accordingly. And part of doing those things accordingly means engaging a professional mental expert or a professional sports psychologist to be able to get that side of the game right. Because remember, mental state is one of the factors that are crucial in terms of getting particular performances right. This should not be a once-off thing. It must be an ongoing process. You build from one stage onto another, build from one stage onto another. Now, just like any other endeavor, it is said that you must decide what you want to become, and when you decide that, you do everything that it takes to become that. In sport, if you are going to be champions and sustain that, you must do whatever it takes to get there. But without the aid, without the presence of sports psychologists, it might be just but a mirage. And after all, like they say, mindset is everything. Until next time, bye-bye.